Okay. 30 seconds. Welcome to the link online. Hello, once again, we are live on Facebook, and I suppose that the signal, there we are, because sometimes it takes a while for the signal to catch up to us, and there we are. And this, of course, is the link online, as I mentioned just a moment ago. I'm Mark Montgomery. With me today are Lynn Desjardins.
Hello.
And Levon Savuns.
Hello.
And we are missing someone, and so we're going to ask somebody in the control room. Pierre Dutil, could you perhaps contact our missing person, Marie-Claude Simard, and find out where she is, because she's supposed to be here. And while Pierre is doing that, I just want to mention that we would like to welcome our listeners on World Radio Paris. Hello! And the shortwave service from Germany, and of course Kauri 97.5 Radio Nigeria. And speaking of shortwave, we have a letter here. It's one of these shortwave reception reports.
Wow, haven't seen those in a while.
Oh my God, this brings back memories.
Yes. It's interesting because it's a well-written one, of course, and it's from Will Grocott in Stratford-upon-Avon in England, who listened to us on shortwave. The only trouble is, of course, is that we aren't on shortwave. We don't broadcast on shortwave anymore. So I presume that he heard us from the shortwave service in Germany.
Oh, which relays
the signal from the internet.
Oh, cool.
So, and we don't have, unfortunately, any more audience relations person to deal with these. So I suppose he has the proper information here that verifies that he did hear the program, but I think that Will Grocott, you have to contact the shortwave service in Kale, I guess, or Cali, to get a QSL card verification.
Well, maybe we have one of those old QSL cards lying around somewhere in the deep.
I don't think so.
You know, it was 2012 when we stopped shortwave service.
Yes,
so.
our storage room the cupboard is bare, unfortunately. So I guess, Will Grocott, I guess you have to contact them because, as I said, we don't have...
Could it be Paris that relayed too? Could be Radio Paris that relayed
I think Paris broadcasts on AM locally. But so anyway, that's the situation there.
Anyway, we're glad he's listening. Absolutely.
All right, now take a look. What's coming up on the program? As always, some very interesting and topical subjects. Lynn, what do you have?
I'll tell you a really scary story about the risk of getting potentially deadly melanoma, the risk for Canadians and for everybody else.
And Levon?
Well, I'll take you diving in the Arctic Ocean to explore kelp forests.
All right, and I have a story about the ongoing dispute between Canada and China, the diplomatic and trade dispute, and an expert says we got to get tougher on that. But now, I guess Pierre has found Marie-Claude, our missing persons. Marie-Claude, are you there?
Where are you?
Hi!
Oh my God.
Where are you?
Oh, I'm fishing.
Where?
And I'm actually, I can see you guys. The tower is right in front of me. I'm on an island in the middle of the river called St. Helen Islands. And the park is called the Parc Dieppe. And that's it. So I'm fishing. I haven't caught anything yet, but there's a lot of friends here. I'll show you. Let me flip.
That's a beautiful view of...
There they are.
Oh, there they are.
Yeah, and we have a friend who caught a fish. Hi, what's your name?
My name is Hao.
How? Oh, and you just caught a fish. Can we look at the fish?
Yes,
Great.
that's on the ground.
Okay, here is the fish. Okay, so, well, yeah, poor little fish, but it's a beautiful fish. It's a walleye. And, yeah, that's it. And you can cast a back. So, and now here we go. I'll show you.
Okay to release it.
Yeah, you can release the fish now. See, there's a very popular spot here. Can you hear me?
Yes, where are you, Marie-Claude? Okay, can you hear us?
What? Where am I? Well, here I am.
So anyway, you're on the island, St. Helen Island, which is what, just
Well,
across from.
it's a little island off St. Ellen Island. It's Havre, I guess. And so that's it. And I'm right in front of Radio Canada. I'll be at work very soon.
Actually, you can see the
oh my God,
Ferris
that's a
wheel
boat.
behind. Yeah, and
Look
one
at
of those
the
tall
boat.
buildings is us.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were a fisher person, Marie-Claude.
Oh yeah, I love the fish.
Well, are you going to eat the fish if you catch something?
I'll I'll make sure it looks okay, normal, and yes, of course I'll eat it. They look great. Look, I'm showing you images of what I see.
Well, but
Can you
isn't
see
there
the tower right there?
Yeah. See where the white tower is? Our tower is just to the left of that. So that's
Exactly.
where
That's
we
a
are.
beautiful view of Montreal
Yeah, it's
from
park.
the south.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of fish can you catch in the river, the St. Lawrence River, just off Montreal?
Okay, well, there's that walleye, which is a great fish. Let me just put this here so I can kind of. Okay, here. Sorry. Yeah, there's walleye. There's bass. There's a spike, and the season just opened. And even on the website of the City of Montreal, it says it's one of the activities you can do in this park, which is Dieppe Park. And do you want to look at me throw my line?
What are you using for bait?
Worms.
My baby. It's one of those little plasticky things.
Worm.
I was going to use a real earthworm, but they say my fellow fishermen are better than.
So fake worms fool the fish there.
Plastic pollution.
There she goes.
What's your name again?
How?
Well, he caught up again.
Oh my.
But is he going to eat it? I want to know. Well, aren't you guys concerned about pollution?
Not at all. At this point, we're too much in the passion of the fishing. Look, another.
Excellent. Fabulous.
But
Marie-Claude, do you have your permit?
oh yeah, I saw it yesterday.
Oh, good job.
I hear that okay. I hear that they check very often.
What does a permit cost?
$7?
It's $22 for the whole
Oh.
year.
And the permit's good for the season then?
For the whole season, for anywhere you fish. And last year it was 32. It went down. It's great.
So when you say anywhere, do you mean anywhere in the province or anywhere in Montreal?
What's already in
Permit good, you said for anywhere. Do you mean anywhere in the province or anywhere just in Montreal region?
It looks like the water is high.
Yes, but where there's a lot of water, this is where they catch them. Oh, I see a lot of fishes there. Let me see. Can you see the person there with a lot?
Yeah, there's somebody who caught something again.
Well, Marie-Claude, we're going to have to move on. You have to come back to the studio.
Oh yeah, but I just want to tell you, easy to get here by metro.
Oh, you can take the subway.
So you can take the subway to get there.
I took bicycle
Oh yeah.
and okay. And it's great.
All right. If you catch a fish, you'll have to prepare it and present it on the program next week. Then.
I'm not sure I'm going to eat though.
Yeah, me neither. Anyway, great to talk to you. Have fun. I'm glad it didn't rain on you.
Thank
We'll
you.
see.
Bye.
Bye.
So there we have Marie-Claude. Gone fishing.
Fishing, yeah.
It's like 10 minutes away practically is the crow
Literally
flies. You just
across the
across the
river from-
river.
Well, you know, speaking of the of fishing in the water, you have a water-based story.
Yes,
and this is farther north, and it's got to do with climate change as well.
Absolutely, a lot further north. Do you know that there are kelp forests in the Arctic? Kelp is this brown seaweed and there's lots of kelp forests off Canada's eastern coast and western coast in Western Australia, northern California. But with climate change, the Arctic Ocean is warming up. So these kelp forests are moving further and further north. I mean, the Inuit polar explorers have, observed these kelp forests in the Canadian Arctic for centuries. But now, with the sea ice receding, there is possibility that they can move even further north and bring all this very rich habitat and everything that comes with it further north. To find out about this kelp forests, I spoke with Canadian researcher Karen
Philby Dexter.
Philby Dexter. She is from originally from Nova Scotia, from St. Margaret's Bay. She did her PhD in marine biology at Dalhousie University, where she studied kelp forests off the coast of Nova Scotia. Then she moved to Norway. She did 2 years of research there, and now she's back in Canada. She got a fellowship here in Canada with the Arctic Net, which is it's a kind of huge Arctic research program at Laval University in Quebec City. And I was very curious. I saw her article about this kelp forest in the Arctic. And I phoned her. It turned out she was back in northern Norway and was preparing to go diving. She sent us a couple of photos of what this kelp forests look like. And I began to ask her to explain where in the Arctic do we find these kelp forests.
Mm-hmm. So in general, kelp tends to grow on rock. And basically, they're found throughout the Arctic, anywhere you get rock, and you have some light reaching the seafloor. So when you look at all the observations, places that you don't find them tend to be places that are almost always covered by sea ice, or where the bottom is just too sandy for the seaweed to attach to. But other than that, they can survive in the coldest waters we find in the Arctic. They can survive in places that get scoured by ice. They can survive underneath sea ice for most of their life and just grow in a short burst during a very short window where the ice actually isn't there and the light can reach the floor. Or the bottom of the ocean. So they're actually remarkably adapted to live sort of hidden underneath the ice and on these very remote Arctic coasts where you don't have any forest. The whole land is quite barren, but then you go underwater and suddenly there's underwater marine forest there.
Now, you have been diving, I guess, to study this underwater forest. Tell me, what is it like to be in one of these forests? How tall do these kelps grow?
So it depends on where you dive, but I studied kelp forests in Canada. I did my PhD in Nova Scotia, and then I went to the Norwegian Arctic. So in Norway, they reach 2 meters high, and they basically, the species in Norway you could almost call them small trunks that would be about 1.5 meters that go fully upright into the water and then make these big blades. So you have very much a canopy, and then you can sort of go underneath the canopy and the light dims, and you can see all sorts of fauna and crabs and sea urchins and vertebrates that are hiding in the habitat and all these trunks. So it actually looks like a forest.
And that was an excerpt of my conversation with Karen Philby-Dexter. She's a research fellow in marine biology at Laval University in Quebec City. And she told me this great story. They were diving in one of these fjords in Norway, and suddenly a U.S. submarine shows up there.
Oh,
so yeah, it's quite an interesting. I find it fascinating. She sent me a video that I'm hoping that I'll be able to incorporate in my story once it's up on the web, and we'll post it on on our website. It shows her basically diving and this kelp forest under sea ice. Quite a view there. Unfortunately, we weren't able to show it for technical reasons, but hopefully we'll fix that when I post my story.
And that'll be on like later today and throughout the weekend.
Yes, yes.
All right, very good. And the other thing, of course, is that as the kelp moves north because of the changing climate, and as you said, it brings all kinds of new things up there, which perhaps is good on one hand, but perhaps not so good on the other, because these are species that normally wouldn't be attracted there, right?
Well, and the thing is that you already have these kelp forests in much of the Arctic. It's just a matter of them, moving further north. One of the issues that she mentioned was that climate change also is causing a lot of soil erosion. Yes, and so all this permafrost that is basically dirt that has been frozen is now thawing and flowing into the ocean. So what she's looking at is how these two forces, climate change, on one hand, warming waters help kelp forests move further north. But on the other hand, this turbidity that is created by this flowing permafrost into how it might actually slow some of that growth. So you have these two twin forces now working on this kelp forest.
Yeah, they're muddying the waters.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And washing a lot of that dirt onto the sand floor.
And these kelp forests need that clear water, sunlight to be able to grow. So it's a very interesting period that she's coming back, and she's going to be going to the Canadian Arctic later this summer in August to be doing research up on Baffin Island.
Okay, so we'll look for your report a little bit later on today and throughout the weekend. Coming up, we're going to talk about diplomatic and trade problems between Canada and China. Well, the diplomatic and trade spat between Canada and China over the detention of a top Huawei executive ramped up again this week as China formally charged two Canadians whom they had detained on charges of being a threat to Chinese security. China's dispute is really with the U.S., who asked Canada to detain Meng Wanzhou as she is wanted in the U.S. on charges of fraud. Now, Charles Burton is a political scientist at Brock University in Ontario and is a former diplomat and expert on China. And in this excerpt of our conversation, I asked him if China is pressuring Canada because it perceives our government as being weak.
I think that this incident has revealed how very challenging it is to engage with a Chinese communist system that is such at odds to our norms and practices and values. So I think from that point of view, our current strategy seems to be to try and convince the United States to do our work for us and pressure the Chinese government to release Kovriken's favor and to drop the charges against Ms. Meng. Well, for one thing, I don't think that the U.S. president has the ability to order the dropping of an ongoing judicial process against Ms. Meng. That's really up to the U.S. judiciary, who are alleging that she engaged in serious crimes of fraud. And secondly, I don't think that they will support us in this way. So I would like to see Canada actually showing some backbone in this matter and engaging in some retaliation. And there are various things that we could do. For one thing, we don't have an ambassador in Beijing at present, and I would suspect that's because the Chinese authorities have been refusing our candidates, in which case I think we should expel the Chinese ambassador to Canada And we could do that on that basis, or on the basis that his comments that the Canadian judiciary arrested Ms. Meng because it's informed by white supremacist attitudes is really completely unacceptable and beyond the normal bounds of diplomatic discourse. I think that the people who are holding Kovrikin's favor, the Ministry of State Security of China, have agents in Canada working through the Chinese consulates and embassies with diplomatic cover, and some who don't have diplomatic passports. And I think that we ought to start expelling some of them, despite the fact that China will respond very, very vigorously to that. And I think the other issue, which is huge for Canada, is this import into Canada of fentanyl, which is killing 7,000 Canadians a year. We know that this noxious substance originates from several small factories in South China, and the Chinese government have not been prepared to engage in any serious measures to stem the flow of fentanyl into Canada. So I think that we could, with legitimate basis, start to engage in extensive customs inspection of all Chinese origin shipments into Canada, which of course would impact on the Chinese economy. And so there are a lot of things we could be doing. We're not doing any of them yet. I hope we'll start doing them soon.
Professor Burton, I think you've also said that China is intent on world domination, and they don't want to play by fair rules.
The expectation of the Chinese leadership is that the U.S. is in decline, and that China will rise to assume a role as the superpower of the world. China expects this global change to take place by the year 2050. And so a lot of its current policies, which are hostile to our interests as a middle power, liberal democratic middle power, I think are informed by this larger aspiration of the greater scheme. So from that point of view, we really have a serious issue if China doesn't want to participate in a rules-based international order as presently constituted.
And that was Charles Burton. He is a political science professor at Brock University in Ontario, and the full interview is in our highlights section. And one of the things we talked about there briefly in this is that, for example, China is building these islands in the South China Sea, and the UN has condemned that action, and China has said, we don't care. You know, okay, you can condemn it all you want, not going to stop us. So it's kind of the idea. I asked him, I said, we've heard this expression that companies are too big to fail. You know, remember when they had the collapse of the economy and some companies were bailed out because they were too big to be allowed to fail. And I said, is it the case because China is too powerful to contest? And he says, to a certain extent, that's true. So this is China's, apparently China has a plan called the Belts and Roads. And he said all the belts and roads internationally that they're working on, China wants them all to end up back in China. So,
not to mention they're putting huge amounts of money into very small countries, and creating so much debt that these countries are really going to be very much beholden to China. At least that's what we're reading in the Western press.
Well, I mean, China is very concerned about geopolitical dominance of U.S. They're trying to create an alternative system of trade and trade routes that bypass the marine trade routes that are right now controlled by the U.S. Navy. And the Chinese are hoping not for too long, because they've pumped massive amounts of money to upgrade their Navy. There was a very interesting series of articles written by Reuters about China's upgrading its military and particularly the Navy. And this One Belt, One Road initiative is one of these kind of strategic efforts by China to reduce the dominance of U.S., not only the trade system, but the entire logistics system that has been created over the last 100 years, 200 years to support this Western-backed free trade. And so they're building infrastructure, they're buying ports, they're building rail lines, they're investing heavily even in the Arctic as a potential point to remove U.S. dominance of sea lanes in the areas that are heavily controlled by the U.S. Now. but they're getting ready to challenge the U.S. and the Western system by extension.
Well, as he said, they plan to hope to have this in effect by 2050, and as you mentioned, they're rapidly building up the Navy. They are rapidly building up the Air Force. I saw an article that they had like 10,000 tanks, and the thing about it is they're always upgrading. You know, they're paying attention to what they're doing, and they're getting feedback, and they're upgrading all their military hardware. So they want to be the superpower, and that may happen.
Well, it certainly looks right now that China is really investing in becoming a superpower.
Mm-hmm. All right, if you have any thoughts on that, drop us a line here at the link, info@rcinet.ca. And, well, we're talking about a bunch of interesting subjects, and Lynn, you have a topic about melanoma and the fact that we live far north and we think, okay, we're not in the sun belt because Canadians go south to get warm, but we should be aware of this problem.
Absolutely, Mark. It's a long weekend in Canada. The weather's finally getting a bit warmer and people will be wanting to go outdoors. Monday is a holiday. May 13th, though, was also World Melanoma Day. So, dermatologists thought this was a very good time to remind people of the need to protect themselves from the sun's harmful rays. I spoke with Dr. Julia Carroll. She is a dermatologist who's on the board of the Canadian Dermatology Association.
Melanoma is the deadliest skin cancer. So in Canada, we know that there's an estimated 1,240 deaths from melanoma, and men comprise about 790 of those, and women 450. So compared to other types of skin cancer, for example, basal cell carcinoma, which 100% of people survive from, melanoma is quite deadly.
So those figures were annual figures?
So yes, those are annual figures from a survey that we did in 2017.
And what causes this melanoma?
So 80 to 90% of skin cancers, including melanoma, are caused by exposure to ultraviolet radiation. So that radiation can come from tanning beds or regular exposure to sunlight. And these are all risk factors for cellular damage.
Now, we live in a northern country where it's a winter very much of the year. Canadians might think they're immune from this. How does our danger, our risk, compare to other countries?
Well, it's interesting that you would ask that question because ultraviolet B radiation, which is the one that burns you, it goes up and down depending on the weather. So it'll be higher on a sunny day and lower on a cloudy day or an overcast day. But ultraviolet A radiation stays the same where you live no matter what the year is. So yes, we would have less sun exposure or less exposure compared to someone who lives closer to the equator. But if you can see your hand in front of your face, there's enough daylight out there that you are getting ultraviolet radiation exposure.
Is it your sense that Canadians are paying attention to this and taking precautions?
I think so. We did a study of Canadians in 2018, and we just wanted to know what their thoughts were around skin cancer and sun protection in particular. And we did find some positive things. So we found that 77% of them said that using a sunscreen is important, and 72% agreed that wearing sun protective clothing was also important. 59% said that it's important to stay out of the sun between 11 and 3, and that was a significant increase for us. The year before, there only had been 49% of people that felt that way. And then we also know our message is getting through because 87% of those studied use an SPF factor of 30 or higher, and a significant amount of them, 58%, conduct self-examinations of their skin, and 34% would ask their doctor or dermatologist to conduct skin exams.
And now some people think if they totally protect themselves from the sun, they're not getting their vitamin D requirements. What do you say to them?
Well, we know that when you expose yourself to the sun, you increase your risk of skin cancer from UV radiation. So our thought is that trying to use the sun as a way to get vitamin D is really counterproductive for a healthy lifestyle. So instead, what I'll counsel my patients is that if they really find vitamin D to be an important part of their healthcare plan, that they take the vitamin D in a supplement because, for people that live all around the world know that the sun is different in different places. It's different in different times of the year. And so if you're looking for a reliable, consistent source of vitamin D, the sun is a poor choice. Taking a daily supplement is an easy, safe way to do that and know that you're getting exactly what you need every day.
So, Dr. Julia Carroll says that she puts on sunscreen every single day, winter, summer, rain, or shine. And, you know, she talked about misconceptions in my conversation with her. And it reminded me that I had the misconception that if you have relatively darker skin that you're not as at much risk. Well, guess who was diagnosed with pre-cancer on my nose?
Oh my.
Yep. So I had that removed, treated. It was fine because we caught it early. But, you know, I wear sunscreen every day. I put it on and I hate it. It's gooey and it's sticky. But you can get different kinds. But, you know, she said winter, summer, rain, shine.
Well, the other thing, of course, is that if you're out fishing or something, you can be protected from above, but the light reflects from the
Off the
water.
water,
And
yeah.
the same with snow.
It's in
I
the
mean,
snow, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we're
Skiing.
almost out of time, so we have to say goodbye. So for Lavon and Lynn and our technicians today, Marc-André Deschamps and Benoit Durand, and of course Pierre Dutil and the absent Marie-Claude Simard, who may or may not come back from the fish. Take care until next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.